This is Module 7, Part 1 of the Foundations of Programming with Python video series. In this part, we will be looking a bit more detail into working with text files. We have been using text files in the past, so this example, let me switch over. This example shows how we were writing data. The one thing that I did here is I combined the open, write and close functions within a private function that I defined for this file, so that all three operations are done within this function, guaranteeing that the minimal time necessary to actually do the right operation are being used. Also, this allows me to do the same kind of operation by just calling this one function, this one custom function, from multiple locations in my code if I need to. So let's see this working. So it says, like we expected, success data saved to file. So let's open that file. Text, and there it is. We don't need to panic. Another mode is, perhaps I should go back, and so the mode that we have been using while opening the file, using in the open statement here, is actually a W mode, like write. So this is the mode that we have been using here. Another mode in the open statement is actually to use it as read. So I created a second function here for reading the data and expanded on the last example. So what you're doing is we're first saving the data, then we are reading it back in, and we are displaying it all the time. It's actually embedded between print statements here, so that we actually can see down while the code is executing that it is actually going through the different steps and can follow it. So I've been using an input here for data is saved to file, so that we actually now can look into our text file, and it actually has been already reloaded. So we have the two lines now in here because I have two lines up here, so I changed this string as well. And now we have the input here, so if I'm giving it a return that we actually can continue, then it's actually loading the data and displaying it. Then there is the append mode that we have been working with already. So we have got the write mode, read mode, and append mode, which appends data to an existing file. So again, here I'm using the same string as in the read mode. I'm saving the data with read mode. I'm using the input, then I'm appending data. So that's another custom function. I'm using the open with the a attribute for the append mode. I am appending this string here. So on purpose putting a string in here instead of having it predefined to also show that it's possible this way, as well as to distinguish it from the top one. And then we are reading it back in, displaying it, and let's see this in action. So we have the data saved to file. We can go in here. We saved two lines because the input is only the first two lines, and then we are following it with the append mode after the input. So there should only be 2 lines. Now, the moment I'm going with the input, we are getting the additional line saved. Then we're reading it back in, and actually we see 3 lines here. And now if we're going back in here, we also see the 3rd line here. So the write mode did create the first 2 lines, the append mode added the last line. So that all worked as we would have expected. This is what we have been using so far. Just in a nutshell, combined everything together. There are a few more options on how to work with files. So the number of possibilities are actually pretty overwhelming. So let's have a look at a few examples. One option is actually using the read line option. So on each call for the read line option, the next line and only one line of data gets returned. So while the access to, and what needs to be remembered here, this is valid as long as the access to the file stays open. So if I'm actually running this code, so what is happening? We're saving the data to file. We see that we have this data in the file if you're using the complete read function. Now with the read line function, we are reading, on the first time, we are reading the first line, and the second time around, we are reading the first line. This is what I meant. As long as the file is open, the read line reads the next line. And because we are actually closing the file access, the next time we're coming back in, it starts at the first line again. So in order to actually be able to read the complete contents of a file with the read line function, we would need to use a loop in here to actually go until the end of the file. And every time we are closing the file, we are resetting the cursor that is a marker what line to read next. We are resetting that cursor to the first line. Then let's have a look at the read line with a loop. So here, read data for n lines. So I made basically a copy of the same function for the read line, and I'm asking, well, this function is asking to read this many lines, and we are simply reading this number of lines out of the file. And the loop, what I'm doing here is I'm using the n lines. So as long as n lines is larger than 0, I'm going through the loop, and I'm simply decrementing this n lines that I'm getting as a parameter in the function. I'm decrementing this by 1. So however many integers, however large this number is in here, this is how often I go through the loop. So let's say n lines is 3. So n lines is coming in as 3. N lines is larger, 3 is larger than 0. So we are going in the loop. We are doing one read line. One read line. We are decrementing n lines. So n lines now reads 2. N lines is larger than 0. We're doing a read line. So we have read 2 lines. We are decrementing n lines to 1. it's still larger than 0. We are doing another read line, so we have read 3 lines. We are decrementing n lines, so n lines is now 0. And we are going back to the top of the loop, and n lines now is no longer larger than 0, so our loop is satisfied. We're closing the object and we're returning the data. In total, we have read 3 lines. This is how this loop is set up. There's always multiple ways how you can do that, so this is the way that I choose to do here. We haven't seen it, I don't think we have seen it so far in this setup. I just wanted to demonstrate a different way of implementing a loop. Also, what I did is I added another function here, which is very similar to read n lines, but it's actually the nth line. So I'm returning the 3rd line of data. So I'm only returning 1 line of data, and it's the nth line in this function here. And how I'm doing this here is, up here I've been using the data is a list, and I've been appending the output of the read line to the list. Here I'm simply using data and adding read line in here, and because I'm going through to the nth line, I'm always replacing what has been in data before. So this means in the first line, data is the first line. If my nth line, let's stay with the example of the 3rd line. If my nth line is the 3rd line, on the first go around, data is the first line. On the second go around, data, the first line data, gets replaced by the second line. The 3rd time around, I'm replacing data with the 3rd line, and because I'm then, my condition for the while loop is satisfied, I'm going out of the while loop. This data stays on the 3rd line, and that is what I return. So let's see this all in action. So we're reading that, and here is where we're going through the loop. So here are the first 2 rows of data in the file. So the first one is don't panic, and the second one, and as always 42, back to usual answer. And here is the 4th line. So I added a few more lines to this whole code, and I'm asking for the 4th line, and we see that we can't panic now. So let me go into our demo data. So this is what our data actually looks like. So reading the first 2 lines, we are getting these 2 as we would expect in a list. So that is perfectly fine. And then we are asking for the 4th line, and we are actually getting back our 4th line here as the answer. And Ron can go on and panic now. The next option that I want to demonstrate you is the read lines. So there is an additional S in here. And what this read lines function is actually doing, it reads all the lines and returns a list. So instead of actually going through there line by line, adding it to a list with a loop, we simply can set up our data. We are using it as, setting it up as a list, and then we are doing the call read lines, and then all data in the file, each line is 1 value in this list. So let's see this running, and here is the read lines result. So here we're getting the read lines result, And as we would have expected, each line is its own entry, its own value in the list. Yeah, another option is actually using a for loop to read the data out of the list. So what I'm doing here is you can set it up for the opening of a file or the file object in a different way, and you can access your file like a sequence. So this is exactly how we have been working with sequences, a for loop over sequences, iterating over sequences. You can do the exact same thing with the file object. So you can for line in the open object, file object, you're simply doing your data append line. So this is also an option that you can do. And lastly, I want to introduce you to the with as construct. So this has actually a few nice advantages. First of all, the code is much less, and second of all, you don't need to deliberately close the file. So you're just using with, and then you're opening the file object, and you give that the name as, and then you're putting that into the variable name file object, and then you can simply use it as you want. The moment you are out of this loop, out of this hierarchy in the code by going with the indent out, Python closes the file for you. So you don't need to do that closing operation deliberately and possibly forget it, and you don't need to double check that you actually have closed it by using this with as option. So I have changed the save data, read data, and append data, so our first three operations, to the with as. It works for all of them in this way. So just running it again, it actually works simply through, as you can see, like expected, the same way. So this is another option on how to actually use the file access. With this, we're coming to our lab 7a, which would be working with text files. So we will be using the code, continue using the code from lab 6c. I have it included in your packages. So here is your starter code. And what we are going to be doing, we're going to be creating a class for the I/O, and here are the to-dos to read the code, the numbers from file, and add the code to save results to file. So instead of actually using user interaction on our terminal, this lab, what you're going to be doing is you're ingesting the numbers via a file, and you are writing out the results into a file. And the format that we're going to be doing this is both those numbers that you're reading in are comma separated on one line, and you're writing out the results comma separated in another line. So these are the two to-dos in the starter code. that I want you to solve. After you have done that, test your script and write down how the code works. And then think about what would need to be changed to handle multiple lines in the input file with 2 numbers each. And of course also write out the results to the output file. So what would need to be changed in this code then to use this module to have an input file with 20, 50, 200, 2000 number pairs that you can run to actually do the calculation and get a file back with all the results. So think about that. And with this, I am concluding part 1 of module 7 of the Foundations of Programming with Python video series. See you in a bit in the next module.